today during the day was content that I did not curate, right? We were watching the FemTech Summit, over 2,000 people around the world reviewing the speakers today. Well, in the evenings, it was up to me to decide what we should talk about. And tomorrow night, we're going to talk about FemTech and RTP, which is Research Triangle Park, which is where we are. So if you're from out of town, welcome. This is, I think, an amazing place that could be a headquarters for women's health innovation. It's very inexpensive to live. It's very family friendly. Most of our founders are female with families. And so that's actually a part of your story. We can even talk on that. Oh my God, there's so many things that are relevant. She recently moved here because of the FemTech friendliness of this area. Irregardless of that, that's tomorrow. Tonight, we're talking about a current event, a very tragic current event, which is a baby formula shortage. And we may all think that we know about it or understand it, but when we really ask ourselves, like, what is formula? How many babies use formula? Why do they have formula? How is changing formula an issue for babies? I don't know the answers to those things. And so I thought, what an interesting conversation to be had. So I would love for Dr. Trill to introduce herself, introduce your company as to, qualify yourself as to why you are able to talk on this topic. And then let's start with our first question being, just kind of give us a synopsis of what's the situation, and then we'll dive into it.
Thank you so very much. It is a pleasure and an honor to get to speak to everyone today. My name is Dr. Trill. I am a molecular biologist by trade, and I specialize in a fun, specific study which is called proteomics, which is a fancy word to say that I study proteins. And in my last year of grad school, a little bit of an origin story, and I'll let you guys decide if this is a villain origin story or a hero origin story, to be decided. When I was finishing my last year of grad school, my husband and I decided to start our family, which is a fun time to have a baby while you're writing a dissertation. And our oldest daughter had awful colic and screamed all of the time.
What is colic?
And colic is the symptom, which is often utilized as a diagnosis to say your baby's crying a lot. And so the technical definition of colic is for a child to cry for 3 or more hours a day, for 3 or more days a week, for 3 or more weeks on end.
Wow. Yeah. I'm so glad I asked you to define that. That's crazy.
It's awful. And our daughter cried for upwards of 14 plus hours a day. And I took her in and said, okay, something's wrong. I don't know what. I'm a new mom. Please help me fix this. And I was just dismissed and told, like, yeah, babies cry. She has colic, which is a fun way to say we can't help you. Go home. Good luck. And a few weeks into our journey, I was breastfeeding her, and one morning we woke up to find her completely covered in eczema from head to toe with bloody stool after bloody stool after bloody stool. And you can imagine, as new parents, that was absolutely terrifying. So I took her back to the doctor and said, okay, well, now I broke her. Can you help me? This is probably why she was screaming for weeks on end. And still, even at that point, with this massive bloody diaper and this baby who is completely covered in a rash now, I was told, yeah, maybe your baby has food allergies. Consider removing cow's milk protein from your diet. And even as a protein expert, that's my whole job. I had no idea that proteins that I was consuming could transfer to my breast in a way that could elicit a response in my baby. And so I will admit that I love cheese. Like, I really love cheese, but I really wanted to continue breastfeeding. So I removed cow's milk protein from my diet and kept breastfeeding, and she spiraled. And she got worse very quickly. And eventually, her skin was weeping and infected, and all that came out of her little body was blood. And I think that the gastroenterologist just took pity on the shell of a human that I had become at that point, and my eye bags that I'm pretty sure are now permanent, and admitted us to the hospital. And I was breastfeeding her, as one does when baby gets hungry, and a medical professional walked into the room and said, oh my God, I can't believe you would do that. You're poisoning your baby. She then went on a 24-hour starvation diet, which is really fun when you're the food. So being told you can't eat and then having somebody making steak in that room for 24 hours. So I was pumping in the stairwell of the hospital crying. And at the other side of it, they told me that my only option was to switch to a hypoallergenic formula because she had food allergies and they couldn't tell me what she was reacting to. So they had no idea what to tell me to remove from my diet other than cow's milk protein, which did not work. And then the other shoe dropped, which is part of the conversation, that the hypoallergenic formula she needed to be on was $50 a can and would only last a few days. And I was a whole ass grad student living on ramen noodles. There was no budget for $50 a can every couple of days. So I literally went from feeding my baby something that hurt her to not being able to afford to feed her at all. And so I started asking the questions in the hospital of, okay, we don't qualify for any kind of assistance. What can we do? I don't know how I'm gonna navigate this. And I was told, yeah, good luck. And so I asked the question, okay, if you can make a hypoallergenic formula, could I make hypoallergenic breast milk, technically? And the answer was a hesitant, maybe. Consider removing this laundry list of things from your diet, and that might work. And that was all the assistance I was given. I did that. I went on a very strict elimination diet for the entirety of the year, and I breastfed my oldest daughter successfully. Successful for her in that she no longer had symptoms, less successful for me in that I was very skinny. I lost a lot of weight, I lost a lot of hair, I lost some issues with my dental health and mental health. Somehow managed on the other side of this to graduate, I think mostly out of pity from my committee and the shell of the person I had become. And on the other side of it, I really just did this crazy army mom thing. I put my head down and got it done. I'm an army vet. And when my second daughter was born 3 years later, started presenting with the same issue, I popped my head out of the sand and was like, no fucking way. Where are the people, the research, and the resources? There's gotta be something for me. I won't survive this again. And I found lots and lots of other families and no resources. No help. And in all of the irony in the world, at the same time, I was working for a dairy processing facility, which is the other important part of my background for this particular topic, because I literally have lived and breathed the world of FDA audits and food manufacturing and know all about the process that this formula company went through to eventually get shut down. And at the dairy processing facility, I learned a few weeks postpartum, back at work, that's a whole other conversation for another sit down, and breastfeeding my second food allergy baby. And I'm teaching lab techs how to use this simple little lateral flow test. And I'm sure all of you now used a lateral flow test to swab your brain, right, for COVID. And so that same type of test we have for food manufacturers that they can use to detect cross-contamination of other allergens in the facility. So for example, if they run soy milk on that equipment and then run cow's milk, they have a simple little lateral flow to prove that they didn't accidentally cross-contact those. And they give that to the FDA to see we clean good. And so I'm teaching lab techs how to use this and literally had that like stereotypical aha, oh my God, moment of this would completely change my life. Right now, if I could just squirt breast milk on this thing and know if there was soy in there. So I ran into the closet and I squirted some breast milk on the thing. As one does. And it didn't work. I was really upset. And so the questions became, why do we do this for cows and we don't do this for women? And why doesn't it work? And the answer to the first question was because men don't lactate. And the answer to the second question is because no one cared until that point to understand what the allergens look like when they get to your breast. No one had done the research and the work. And this is the one substance that almost every human is going to consume at some point in their life. And no one had thought to look what it looks like when you eat a peanut. What does a peanut look like when it gets to the breast? Because it doesn't look like a peanut anymore. We're not shooting peanuts at our nipples. That'd be very painful. They look kind of cool. Cool party trick. Cool party trick. Very painful. And so that's what I did the last 4 years of my life now, almost exactly. I started working on the side, getting grant funding and bootstrapping our faces off with my amazing husband to make the very first test kit that would allow us to detect allergens in the presence of human milk. And we have now created that first test. It's done. And I'm so incredibly proud. And in the midst of that, I am titties deep in fundraising and whatnot for manufacturing of this amazing product. And then the formula shortage happened. And you can imagine, as somebody who's literally lived this experience of only having one formula in the world that my baby can consume, and we work with thousands of families every single day. Today we offer education and consults and experts to help families navigate their food allergy journeys today before our test strips are available. We have an app, all that fun stuff. And to have them come to us and say, I can't feed my baby. Or for a lot of us, you may have seen the post about, well, if your baby uses this formula, try this one. Doesn't work for food allergy families. For many of them, even one little different ingredient in that formula will elicit a response for them. So these parents are literally having to decide between, do I feed my baby and cause them an allergic reaction, or do I not feed them at all? And so Free to Feed really took a hard left turn, as you can imagine, in the last 3+ weeks. And we started the Free to Feed Share program, where we are shipping breast milk with various elimination diets across the country. We're shipping formula across the country. We've been in 35, probably almost 40 states today. We've shipped thousands of ounces of breast milk and hundreds of cans of formula to these families who need it from families who are providing it. And my hair's been on fire. So this is the first time I think I've sat down in the last 3 weeks. And I'm very excited to get to chat with you guys about why this is so incredibly important.
Let's all give her another round. Absolutely amazing. It was like last week, which, that's how I roll. I'm like, hey, in 3 days I have a summit. Can you speak at it? But I was like, can you speak on the baby formula shortage? She goes, can I? Have you seen our website? We have a whole new campaign. So you are literally the perfect person. I am so proud of you. I am so honored. You are the FemTech story. A woman experiencing an issue who is educated in STEM and said, this is unacceptable. And I have the knowledge, the power, and the know-how, and the stamina, and the privilege now as women in society to create a solution. I'm so proud of you. This is amazing. Tell me a little bit about the history of formula. Formula wasn't always around, right? When did formula start to be a thing? What is formula?
Yeah, so formula is super fascinating to dig into the history of. So before there was any type of formula, mostly there was community and a village, right? You hear that saying, it takes a village, but all of us are isolated in our homes by ourselves. Where's the village? Where are these people? Are they in my closet? When do they come out and with their titties and help me? So usually, back in the past, there was a village and there was wet nursing and sharing, and for those who could not breastfeed, there were other options. And there is history behind these children who didn't have the option or opportunity to be breastfed, given other milk alternatives, right? You can see the history of them taking mushing up bread and trying to make a type of formula with it. And so trying to come up with something, and you can imagine that also led to high infant mortality rates, because we shouldn't mush up bread and give it to our children who are under 6 months old, really under 12 months old. And so eventually it came to a point of okay, is there something better than what we currently have? And a chemist in the 1860s came up with a formula. So not came up with formula, came up with a formula of cow's milk, wheat, and some extra shenanigans in there, a handful of ingredients that he patented and then marketed as baby formula. He patented and marketed as baby formula, and that was the very first. And they patented and they really marketed it as like, go be free, right? Like you don't have to stay home and breastfeed your baby anymore. You can give this in and you no longer have to breastfeed. You don't have just one option any longer. And formula over time, now since that was back in the 1800s, has evolved immensely. The good and bad of it is that, one, it has evolved and we have so much more science involved in determining exactly like what the macronutrients need to be, what the micronutrients need to be in order for formula to be a healthy option for infants today, as opposed to the like slapstick what we had to start with. It was originally a liquid, eventually turned into a powder to make it shelf stable, and then sold across the globe eventually. And that's kind of the history of what led to now what we know as formula and the 17 billion different types that you'll see usually on the shelves. Maybe not today. Today you'll see a blank shelf. But it's really fascinating to see the kind of evolution and how we got to where we're at right now.
Yeah, I was fascinated. Last year, my sister had a baby, and my mom said something about like, oh, he's so constipated, but it's like you can't give babies water. And I was like, you can't give babies water? Like, I thought you give everything water. My succulents have water. Like, what? But you can't give babies just regular water. I don't know that. I don't know. Am I the only one? Because I did not know you could just give babies water. I luckily don't have a baby yet, because I would have definitely given them some Dasani, okay? Not sponsored, just saying. So, you know, when I think about formula, I think of women choosing, I'm gonna breastfeed my baby, dedicate myself to this, or I'm gonna, and I have since relinquished this bias, but like, or I'm gonna submit and just like, whatever, I'm gonna do formula. But I understand that actually a lot of babies do both. A lot of parents do both. Can you tell us about like, what is the current rates of formula use, and is it always women who are not breastfeeding, or two dads not breastfeeding, you know, like, so what's the ratio and who's using formula?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is a common misconception that it's this very binary structure for feeding your child. And it's quite frankly not. It's not binary in any way, shape, or form. There's every version. There is exclusively breastfeeding. There's breastfeeding and then supplementing with formula. There's exclusively formula feeding. Then there's everything on the spectrum of like how much of each you're giving. And in addition to that, you also have breastfeeding parents who may be exclusively pumping. So a lot of us who are go back to work, or many, you know, travel, things like that, we end up having to pump. Actually, high 90 percentile of lactating individuals end up pumping at some point, and some of them end up exclusively pumping. So they're not only like having to pump, but then also feed the baby. So it's like double, triple the work, because then you gotta go clean 17 billion pump parts. It is a thing. And so feeding is very nuanced, and there's a whole spectrum and different situations for every single family. And so the actual numbers behind all of that is about 4 out of 5 babies are initially breastfed. And those babies who are not initially breastfed, oftentimes, one, it's just a decision that the parents made. You do you, boo-boo. For some, it's literally medically not available for them. Maybe they've had breast cancer. Maybe they're right in the middle of some chemotherapy. All kinds of different scenarios allow us to be structurally unable to breastfeed. You may not have the right memory tissue, or may not have sufficient memory cells in your body in order to produce the right amount of milk. And so maybe you do produce some milk, but you can never produce the amount your baby needs. And those percentiles are pretty small. It's not a huge percentage of us who have these medical conditions. But one, oftentimes those medical conditions are preyed upon by marketing to say like, you're not enough, you're not doing enough, you're not good enough, that kind of verbiage and situation, which is heartbreaking and untrue. And on the other side of it, then we have families who do switch completely over to formula. So we have those who are supplementing because they either don't produce enough or they're choosing to supplement, and then those who completely switch over to formula. And there's also a whole myriad of situations in which formula is the only option that is outside of health conditions, which is those who are of the LGBTQIA+ community, those who are adoptees, those who are in foster homes, right? There's so many different nuanced situations, the birthing parent's not available any longer, surrogacy, so many things that can occur that lead to that family absolutely needing formula. And the one thing that I didn't mention that I think is important, especially considering what I'm doing right now, is that there's also the availability for donated breast milk. So for those that don't produce enough, there are also those of us who produce too much, who produce more than we need or can induce lactation more than we need by overstimulating and pumping more. And so those individuals then often can donate, and I donated several hundred ounces of my own breast milk in my first journey to another family. The nuance there becomes if your baby has a food allergy and is reliant on specialized formula especially, it's very hard to find somebody else who has that specific combination diet of exactly what your baby's reactive to. So it is a spectrum, there's all kinds of feeding situations, and it's unhelpful for any of us to judge any of those particular situations because there is so much to unpack there.
Wow, I learned a lot already tonight. And one of the things I saw on social media was, why don't women just breastfeed? It's free. That tells you that people think that women's time has no value. Even when my boyfriend asks me to bring something to him at work and it takes 20 minutes to drive because he forgot something, I think, he should pay me. Right? Our time is valuable. Pumping is time, and we're C-suite ladies now, and so just breastfeeding is, and God forbid you were a part-time worker working at McDonald's where they don't even have a lactation room for you to pump and all that stuff. So, so I normally see formula behind these shelves. You need to ask someone to get a key and open it. So that implies to me that people are stealing it. Condoms are also sometimes behind. I think that's more so about social stigma. But baby formula, I think it's more about price and stealing it and all that kind of stuff. And so tell me about, what is the current price? What's the market around baby formula? And I heard the last few weeks that there's 4 companies that kind of own it. So tell us about the current business model of formula.
Yeah, so I think it's important. First, I want to hit on what you mentioned about women's time lactating, families' time spent breastfeeding, and the average numbers right now is an estimated 35 hours a week. And so, yes, we are making the assumption then that the lactating individual, their time is not worth anything in a full-time job, right? This is a full-time job to feed another human, a few humans for some of us who have multiples, and bless you. And so I think that's really important to kind of double down on. And for your next question about, going to the store and there's a safety, right? Either these formula cans are in this obnoxious jar that they have to release from the wild when you get up to the counter, or actually behind an entire sheet of plexiglass so that you have to saunter up to someone else, ask them politely to let you into the formula cabinet, which already has its own stigma in and of itself. You have to go ask permission to feed your baby. And yes, it is because stealing is very prevalent because it is a small item that costs a ton of money, right? So this product is anywhere for just a small can that's gonna last maybe only a few days, anywhere from the more inexpensive options being $12 to $15 for a can, all the way up to $65 a can. And so we're talking about families spending upwards of $1,000 a month for some of these options. So for
Does it cost the companies a grand to make it?
no.
Okay.
And so on average for the families that have to use hypoallergenic formula, the estimation in the first year of life of how much formula a child will consume is about 110 cans. So in my case then, it would have cost me $5,500 in 1 year to feed my baby on my grad school budget that was like 20 grand.
Very small.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. So yes, then for families who need that formula to keep their baby alive, like I'm gonna steal it too. Don't tell anybody, but I would steal it too. I may have if I needed to. So yes, it's a small container. It's very, very expensive. It's very, very valuable to these families, which is also why it's important to mention that half of the families in the United States who have infants are also on WIC. And so WIC makes up 50% of all infant formula sales, which leads into the next part of your question about structure. So in the US, there are 4 companies that predominantly dominate the sector, but really three that most have the vast majority of the market for infant formula. And so the problem is manifold, but as it relates to WIC and these companies, when we're looking at domestic sales, WIC as a organization does contracts state by state. And so every single state does one contract with one manufacturer, and that's it for the state. So let's say North Carolina has a contract with WIC and they only use Abbott. And that's all that they use. That means that the stores in North Carolina are going to stock Abbott because half of all of the sales in North Carolina are only going to be Abbott. Because they're going to get their formula, go to the counter, and use their WIC. Right? So they're going to make sure they're stocked up on what 50% of our population is buying.
For those who don't know.
And for those who don't know, women and children, so it is a subsidies program essentially for women, children, and families who need extra assistance that are below the poverty line.
Like it's food stamps, but for babies.
Exactly, yeah, think food stamps, SNAP, that kind of situation for infant formula. And so then, if one of our 3 legs of our stool breaks and the manufacturing facility that they are coming out of most of this formula is no longer producing, not only has a recall, but then is no longer producing from that facility, the whole thing falls over. And so, for example, if North Carolina had Abbott as their main WIC source, their only contract was Abbott, that means that Walmart's only carrying really Abbott and a little bit of the other formulas, but not really important to them. And all of a sudden, Abbott's gone. What's on our shelves? I mean, you've seen them. What's on our shelves right now? A whole lot of nada. A whole lot of nothing, which does a few things. When there's not a formula crisis, it means that those families who have food allergies and only can use one formula means I have to go move to a state that allows me to use that formula that my baby's not allergic to if I need WIC. And how many families do you think on WIC just have the capability to up and move to another state? None of them. None of them. So what are they doing? They're just white knuckling it through reactivity. That's what they're doing.
What does that mean?
They're just dealing with the colic, or the bloody stool, the eczema, the rashes, until baby outgrows it, or they're able to get in solids and then can move on, or they can find the means in which to get a different formula. You don't have another option. So that's what's happening when it's not a formula crisis. All of a sudden, one facility is no longer producing. That is 43% of all of the formula in the United States.
One factory.
From this factory, and we have a crisis. A huge, massive crisis. And I'm sure we're gonna dive into what allowed this house of cards to be created, but that's the structure. That's what's happening.
I'm blown away, y'all. Are you want to throw chairs? I want to throw something.
Join me I'll throw things.
I don't know why I signed up for an industry where I'm always mad. Luckily, I'm chronically optimistic. I always find silver linings. But I recently heard on NPR they were talking about this, and they said that one of the big issues for babies to just dramatically change formulas, which reminds me, it's very similar to dogs. You can't just dramatically change your dog's food. If anyone has a dog, you know they get their runs. You gotta gradually get them there, right? And so, what I heard with babies is that they literally will have the enzymes for the formula they're on, and you need to transition them to another formula so that they can actually even start to express the proteins needed for this new formula. And that transition is painful, apparently. So, both for the baby and for the parents. Tell us more about who's dominating this space. You kept mentioning Abbott, so tell us who was the other ones, and then what happened. Is it Abbott whose factory went down? All right, tell us what happened there. But first, tell us who are the main players.
So the main formula players in the United States specifically are Abbott. Abbott makes up 43% of the United States formula.
Wow.
Monopoly, monopoly, monopoly. The next is Mead Johnson, and then the next is Gerber. High 80s percentile.
That's only three.
Three companies make up a vast majority, a huge majority of all of the formula that is sold in the United States. And we can certainly dive into like what allowed that to happen, but what happened with the formula crisis is that back in September of 2021, so we are what, 6-7 months now from that? Yeah, 6-7 months. So September 2021, the FDA gets their first notification of an infant who has been infected with a specific bacteria that we know is common in formula. It is a specific bacteria, protobacteria that will grow in these dry, wet and dry kind of conditions, and we know it's specific to formula. And so they have their first baby, gets this infection. The FDA that week or that time frame, that same month, already had an inspection plan for that facility. It was already on the books. So they already showed up, they already kind of had this in the back of their minds, hey, there's this baby, they got infected, we're gonna keep that in mind, may or may not be from here. You know, it's one baby, we'll see. And when they do their inspection, they find that the plant is grossly negligible. Literally says the roof is leaking, the equipment is damaged, and there's standing water in the facility. And let me tell you from somebody who's been a quality manager at a dairy processing facility, our facility produces a vast majority, the facility that I used to work for produced a vast majority of the revenue and income for the company that I worked for. And so it behooves them to fix that problem ASAP so that we don't have recalls, so that we don't infect people in the general public, so the FDA doesn't come back and knock on our door and shut us down. So it behooves a company like that that's much smaller to fix their problems and to make sure that that doesn't happen in the first place, right? To make sure that your cleaning and sanitation is up to snuff, to make sure that your preventative maintenance for your equipment is up to snuff so that none of those things happen. In Abbott's case, the Sturgis facility, for Abbott Labs, the Q1 revenue for Abbott was $11 billion with a B. And the revenue that came from infant formula for Abbott in that same quarter was a little over 800 million. So like pennies to this company. This Sturgis facility is not their priority. They are not making sure that their quality of standards are up to snuff and their equipment is up to snuff so that babies don't die. So the facility got shut down.
I'm so sorry, I just gotta interject. As a country who's very concerned about babies dying, this is bananas. This is bananas. Moreover, on that NPR interview, I also learned that babies' immune systems aren't ready for all these different bacteria. And so the standards for baby formula factories should be so much higher because the babies aren't ready to, like, they haven't made mud pies yet. They haven't, eaten grass because they fell off their bike. Like, they haven't lived in the world yet. So they don't have that immune system that's ready for those bacteria. So I just wanted to add that into this crazy story. So please continue.
Oh yes, the hypocrisy is strong.
Yeah.
So Sturgis facility gets a warning from the FDA. It's like, hey, your stuff is messed up, you need to fix it. we'll come back. We'll be back. Then in October, the FDA gets a whistleblower report that is 34 pages long about how they're falsifying records and their cleaning isn't complete and how they have lax policies, all of that fun stuff. They don't interview the whistleblower until December. So FDA gets the whistleblower report in October. They interview the whistleblower in December. By February, we have 4 children who have been infected and 2 of them are dead. And Abbott starts their recalls and starts flying formula from overseas. So Abbott started flying formula from overseas back in February, which we don't hear about. And so then in the last month, so April happens. In April, we are seeing the shelves start to go bare. Families start to panic, understandably. They start to overbuy, and formula sales increase anywhere from 5 to 15%. Over the course of a few weeks, all of a sudden, shelves are going bare in specific areas where distribution is not effective because the WIC program ensures that Abbott is the only main provider in that area. So now there's no formula there, like here, like many places, like half of our country. So then the FDA comes back, says, you haven't fixed the problem. Now we have 4 cases, we're shutting you down. Facility gets shut down. They still are not running. They're in the midst of the discussions about when they can come back in. The FDA showed up and did a full swab. The term is escaping me. There was an OSHA term that we use in quality control in the food manufacturing that was like, the FDA is showing up, they're gonna swab everything. And when I say swab, it means they're gonna take literally kind of like a cotton swab, sort of like what you would use to apply your makeup, like a sponge like that, and rub it on the floor and then go test it for bacteria. And they're gonna rub it everywhere. So they're in the premises and they're everywhere trying to find this bacteria that you have killed some children with, potentially, allegedly. And so they do that and they find this bacteria, several strains of this bacteria in this facility. Not surprising, the roof is leaking and there's standing water. Of course there's bacteria. They find this bacteria, they test it back to the DNA from 2 of the 4 infants that they have, that they can sequence. Those 2 infants, the bacteria did not match each other, and they didn't match any of the bacteria they found in the facility. That does not mean that it did not come from the facility. It just means that the FDA didn't find that strain in the facility, and those 2 strains were not related to each other, and we don't have the other 2 out of the 4. So right now, the discussions are all about how do we get this facility back up and running, because we don't have the capacity as a country to not have it up and running, as you can all see. And then by the time we do get it up and running, hopefully early this month, in June, when you make formula, the quality control systems in place ensures that it doesn't get to the actual shelves for about 2 months. So we're buckling up. The facility's not even running. We're nowhere near the end of this. At the same time, in May, a few things happen with the government. On one side, the Biden administration introduces the Protection Act, which essentially says, if you have ingredients that make formula, it has to go to formula companies first, which is all fine and dandy if the main facility was running. So helpful, sort of. And then they also tried to pass a bill that would have given the FDA $28 million to help them fix this problem and make sure that they can get the facility back up and running and put all of the resources they need to fixing this problem, and it gets blocked.
It got blocked?
It gets blocked. It did not pass because 192, I believe, Republicans voted against it. So it did not get passed.
Is there any reason why? Do we know why?
Hypocrisy.
Yes.
I believe one statement that I saw, I watched all of the hearings and whatnot, I believe one statement that I saw was that they felt like giving the FDA money would tell them they didn't do anything wrong and that they were like giving them praise for not doing their job effectively. It feels very like millennial child didn't come home on time and now getting finger wagged by mom. So that's like my own personal problem. So we get the Protection Act passed, we get the second bill blocked, and then they start Operation Fly Formula, which I'm sure you guys have all heard about if you've been on any kind of news, and they're like, hundreds of thousands of pounds of formula is coming across the United overseas. It's amazing.
Fighting to save all the babies.
Operation Fly Formula, the first it landed in Indiana. That shipment was of 2 brands of formula, one of them for toddlers, one of them for infants, only that brand, and would feed 9,000 infants and 18,000 toddlers for guess how long? 1 week.
1 week? Oh my god.
1 week. So it sounded very beautiful. Like, da-da-da. I'm in the army, so like, yeah, you get like the guys in the military with their, bulging out of their uniforms. They only got the hot ones to get on camera. And
I love babies.
right, I'm sick of babies. America! And the formula, and they're making it sound like they're these huge numbers and it's saving the day. And you know what the families have to do to go get that formula? Do you know where that formula went? It did not go to the stores. Did you see it at the stores? You're not gonna see it at the stores. It went to hospitals and pediatricians, and so you have to go get a doctor's appointment.
Which means you need insurance.
Which means you need insurance. You have to go to your doctor to get a can of formula to feed your baby for a week.
Dude, what do we do? Like, what now? What do I do?
Throw things. You throw things.
I just want to open it up to y'all. Do you have questions, comments? I know you do. Yeah, I'm gonna be the mic runner.
So if we have friends or family who are lactating, how can they get involved and donate?
Oh, I'm the mic runner.
Already fired, only one running. That's a wonderful question. So her question was, if we have friends who are lactating, who want to help, what do we do? So anyone who is either able to give or needs to receive, that is what the Free to Feed Share program is doing. So you can go to freetofeed.com/share. Very simple, and there is a give button that you click on and you put in your name, your address, your email address, how much milk you have available. If you're on any kind of elimination diet, we're not exclusively for food allergy families, so we're accepting donations of breast milk from everybody across the United States. So you put in that information and then we connect you with someone who has applied for receive. So on the receive side, same kind of thing happens where they put in what they're looking for. I'm looking for this brand of formula. I'm looking for this kind of elimination diet. Or I'm not looking for any elimination diet, but I need breast milk because I can't find the formula that I would typically use. Then at that point, myself and my tiny army of volunteers,
I need your husband.
I need Peter Holland, who's absolutely wonderful and amazing, and I love him so much. We'll send them a cooler. So the weird hodgepodge that is my life, because I do breast milk research, I literally have a small fleet of coolers and a lot of experience shipping breast milk everywhere from Idaho to Great Britain and back. And so I have a lot of experience with that. And so I have my tiny army of volunteers, my husband, and this fleet of coolers across the US. So we send the giver a cooler, and we have the receiver pay for the shipping if they're able. We are asking for donations from anybody who is able to donate to help for the shipping that for those who can't afford it. You can imagine shipping a cooler of a breast milk stash across the country in the middle of the summer costs about $100 a pop, and so it's expensive. But for some of these families, it's their only option. And even with all of that, so I'm across the country receiving and giving and connecting, and it's amazing. And I cry a lot. And even with all of that, there are still certain formulas we cannot get a hold of. And so then I reached out to our community to have Canadians help us. And so I may or may not, allegedly, possibly, definitely not, importing formula in from Canada to feed babies right now. And so if you want to get involved, freetofeed.com/share, we have a donate button, but even more so and more important, we have a give and a share, a give and a receive button for those who have extra and can help, or those who need.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Next question. Any other questions? Yes. And then Madeline, you're next.
This is so wonderful. I was wondering if you can talk more about the sensitivities and what the common ones are and what you guys have learned, and I guess also when, like how someone lactating and trying to would figure out like what they need to know.
I love this question because I have a younger sister who's allergic to shellfish, peanuts, and bees. And I'm talking like dead in 30 minutes allergic, like real freaking allergic. And the only way she ever realized she was allergic to each was by almost dying. And then they were like, oops, looks like you're allergic to shellfish. And I just still can't wrap my mind around that modern medicine is like, yeah, almost die and then we'll tell you. So how is it for babies?
Bad.
Oh, okay, great.
So what's really fascinating about food reactivity for infants is that a vast majority of infants who present with food allergic reactions actually have what's called a non-IgE-mediated response. So the type of allergy that Brittany's sister has is an IgE-mediated response. I actually have very similar allergies, so her and I could be like besties. Besties with EpiPens.
Yeah, she's got a lot of EpiPens and a bracelet and all the things, yeah.
Yes. Allergies unite. And so when we think about food allergy, we're typically thinking of an IgE-mediated food allergy, right? Like I eat a peanut, I have anaphylactic shock, I get shot in the leg, and I need to go to a hospital, right? I might die. And so when you think of top allergens, the foods that are most likely to elicit a response, those are the foods that the FDA has declared as a top allergen because it could kill somebody. And so over a certain threshold of the population, that is when that food becomes a top allergen. And now, for food manufacturers, they're supposed to be required to give extra labeling, make it bold, for example, or contain statements if they're utilizing that type of ingredient because it could kill somebody. So they need to specify like, hey, there's peanuts in this, so you don't have to shoot yourself with an EpiPen and not die. Now, what is hard though for these families is that most of these infants don't have that type of reactivity. They can, but a vast majority of them have a non-IgE-mediated response, which means their reactions are things like eczema, they can have rashes, oftentimes we'll see like cradle cap that starts to creep down the face and doesn't go away. And then on the inside, we'll see reflux, chronic congestion, vomiting, tummy trouble, gas pains, diarrhea, mucus, constipation, bloody stool, and then all of the secondary symptoms from those primary symptoms, meaning that if your baby has eczema all over her skin, she's scratching like crazy and she's not sleeping, right? I know all about it. If you see a family who's like has their kid in mittens and they're a little bit older, just keep your mouth shut.
I could see your eye twitching.
It was. The number of people who were like, well, if you have her in mittens, she's not gonna develop correctly. Okay, well, if I don't, she's gonna scratch her face off, so kick rocks. And she's just fine, thank you. And she still has a face. So, if you have a baby who has diarrhea and has bloody stool, there's so much inflammation in the gastrointestinal system that the cells in the large intestine are not properly absorbing nutrients any longer, and now you have babies who are failing to thrive. And a whole slew of other issues, right? Feeding aversions. If a baby has really awful vomiting responses to breast milk, that baby's probably gonna be like, no thanks. I don't want your boob, but get away from me. And there's no rejection, like trying to feed your baby breast milk.
Talk about you stand up.
Legit, like rejection, it's real. It's real. I'm still a little bit butthurt about my second daughter. So she's 4. So these are the symptoms that we typically see for these babies, these primary symptoms, and then often these secondary symptoms. What's so confusing for these families is that
almost never will they have all of the symptoms. They will typically have a handful. So for example, my oldest had diarrhea, bloody stool, eczema. My youngest had reflux, vomiting, and some lower GI issues as well. But largely different, right? And so that's where it gets confusing, because oftentimes a lot of these symptoms just get band-aided. The parent goes in with baby and says, my baby has awful reflux, silent reflux, bringing it up, it's really painful for them, they're not sleeping, and the parent just gets placated and dismissed, and like, here's your PPI, which is a type of medication that we know actually isn't great for babies to be on in the first place, that babies aren't actually like approved to be on in the first place. And that happens with all of the other symptoms too. Like, oh, your baby just has really bad eczema. Oh, here's a steroid, and then you just steroid over and over. Have you ever heard of steroid withdrawal in a baby? That's fun. So the problem becomes not only are the foods that we typically have reactions to with a baby are different, because it's a different type of reaction. The reactions are different than what we typically see, and they can range widely. And then lastly, not everything you put in your boob ends up not everything you put in your mouth ends up in your boob. So that means that I can eat peanuts today and not see a reaction, and eat peanuts tomorrow and see a reaction and be very confused. Why? Oh, it must have been that I had raisins, right, with my peanuts. It makes it very confusing to try to navigate what babies reacted to. So the answer to the question of like, how do parents do it? Oftentimes they're either being kind of forced, or they choose to switch over to a hypoallergenic formula because they can't figure out what it is, or they're being blatantly lied to by our society and told that either one, nothing that they eat transfers to the breast, which we hear a lot. So it must be that your breast is bad, you're not good enough, there's nothing you can do about this. Or two, the things that you consume are gonna be in your breast for weeks on end. Which, like, if we can all just conceptually sit here for a second and think about that, why in the world would something that you eat be in your boob for 8 weeks?
I mean, asparagus is like just that nut. Right?
It
doesn't smell for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. It conceptually, then but I'll just be totally honest, and if that's the case, then my boobs are exclusively made of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and they can go ahead and sign me now. There's no way. But that's what I was even told. And even as a scientist, I took it at face value that something I ate was going to be in my breast for weeks on end. And you know what that did to me mentally? It literally, go to a restaurant and ask them to take a steak and wave it over the flame and don't touch anything and just put it on your plate and bring it back out. And you get halfway through the steak and you realize it tastes too good. And you ask the waiter what they cooked it in. And they cooked it in vegetable oil, which is a severe trigger for your child. What do you do? What do you do if you think that that's going to be in your breast milk for 2 weeks? Do you go purge? Do you just go cry? Do you switch to formula for 2 weeks that you can't find this on the shelves? And it's all, quite frankly, a lie that's set up by very smart marketing, because the actual science behind and how we help parents navigate this is that after you consume a food, it spikes in concentration a few hours after you ingest it, and suddenly plummets from there with breast milk removal, which makes sense. So what that means then, it's typically gone within 8 hours, almost always within 24 hours, and we are continuing to push the research on that and continuing to get more data. And quite frankly, I can go and stand on the top of every mountain and scream about transferability and the injustice that this misinformation is for families. But I don't want to. I've been dancing to booby facts on the internet for 4 years now, and it's not gotten me very far. Yeah, right? I'm a fan.
Fans,
right?
Movie fact fans. I don't even know what that is.
So instead, really truly became the only answer to this problem is to put the power in your hands. Just give you the data. If you know what's in your boob at any given time, in the comfort of your own home, you have an ingredient vet for the breast, done deal. I'm gonna give you love, support, and empathy, and data. And you're gonna run with it and reach your feeding goals, whatever that might look like for you, and actually know what your baby's reacted to. Their magic combo of something absolutely bananas, like shellfish, peanuts, and bee stings, right? Because oftentimes it is a combo, and figuring that out through your diet that's eliciting a response in your baby is hard, it's disheartening, and it's heartbreaking.
Thank you. Wow, it's so powerful. Did that answer your question times 10? Alan, last question, and then I'd love us to just kind of chat and network and eat and drink and talk about vaginas.
All right, well, I hate to be the last thing preventing us from talking about vaginas. But obviously these WIC programs in all these states are trying to make their voters happy and reduce costs as much as possible and sign these exclusive contracts with formula manufacturers. And the risk is, of course, we can have these oligopolies, or I guess in-state monopolies perhaps, or cartels, I don't know, however you want to call it. You end up with risks like this where there's a problem with one company and then everybody's sort of screwed. What are some policy initiatives that you think like legislators can perhaps take that might reduce this risk in the future?
God, I love a solution-oriented question. That's a great end one to end on.
That's wonderful. And also, just like mad shout out to your shirt. It says the original 3D printer, and it's a uterus.
That guy's a real deal. And men in FemTech are the best men. Really.
I know.
If you're single, look for a man at a FemTech conference, okay?
That one's taken. So the question was, with these monopolies and also taking into consideration WIC and contracts and taxes and wanting to keep taxes low, all that, what do we do policy-wise to make sure this doesn't happen again? Right? What do we do to prevent this from happening again? And I will preface this to say, scientist and CEO and mommy and all that other crazy stuff that I do, Army. I'm actually still in the National Guard today. I have to go leave for military duty in a few days. Pray for me. So I will preface that, not a politician, and I'm highly aware of the things that I don't do. What I will say from my own experience in the industry and what we know from scientific data is that one, when you force children to be given a formula that elicits a response for them, the long-term healthcare costs to the entire country and even the globe is massive. Literally, food allergies cost this country billions of dollars every single year. So those types of responses, the creams you have to pay for, the healthcare, all of these pieces you're paying for it. You're paying for it. So you may be keeping the now costs a little bit lower by only having one contract, making it as low as possible, all that fun stuff. But what you're not doing is thinking about long-term costs to the United States, quite frankly, by shoehorning these families into a formula that isn't best for them. In addition to that, we also have data that is very, very clear that shows that if instead we spent those funds really focused on breastfeeding support and actually getting families the love, empathy, and education that they need and deserve, that even just a 10% increase in breastfeeding in the United States would reduce healthcare costs in the US, again, by billions of dollars every year. It's insanity. So we're picking up pennies and leaving dimes, right? So we're picking up pennies and missing the dimes because it gives us short-term rates. You get to scratch that itch, and keep things cheaper right now. And quite frankly, if we can all be honest, the individuals who are making these choices aren't impacted by this problem. These individuals are flippity-flopping, 70, 80 years old. They're not feeding babies, and it's been a hot second since they've had to feed babies, and they're not gonna have to feed babies. This is not a priority for them. And so in addition to that, not only should WIC be more inclusive, and they did that temporarily, they opened WIC up to other options because literally there isn't Abbott. So they did open WIC up temporarily for other options. I am very hopeful and definitely pessimistic that this will continue, that WIC will continue to be a more open source, because if you do it right, it doesn't have to cost a whole lot more, right? Yeah, we can do contracts, but what if we can do like continuous rolling and have it actually be the formula companies that have to keep it below. Everybody gets in, but it's under a certain threshold or whatever it may be. There are other ways, there are better ways to go about this, and the only people who are benefiting from that type of monopoly state to state are formula companies. And they're fighting for it, right? Every state they get is a huge win for them. So that's one. And then on the other side of things, the Infant Formula Protection Act, back in the 80s, I think, essentially stifled all innovation for formula because it puts so many stipulations on regulations around like what you have to have and what type of, even nuanced things like the ingredient deck verbiage is reasons why formulas from the EU are not allowed to be sold here. Even though many of them have better products, better macro and micronutrients for our children, not allowed to be sold in the US because of some random stipulation that the FDA is like, no, you can't be sold here. And so that's why we've created this monopoly, and we've created a monopoly of companies that are frankly not monetarily benefited by putting babies first. And so the other big piece is that we have to break down the monopoly. The companies that are in charge of making sure that our babies are fed and happy, healthy, and not dying should not have that part of their department be like their accounting error on their balance sheet, right? Like it should be a predominant part of their industry and shouldn't be a second thought. And allowing for more companies to come in, more innovation. And that's the big problem is that when the FDA is building all of this, their job is not to make sure that there is still a supply. That's not their job. Their job is not to make sure there's still a supply. It is the rest of the governmental policies to ensure that there isn't a monopoly so there's still a supply. And that has been fundamentally broken.
I mean, if this is not a FemTech case 101, I don't know what is, because a lot of women's health has been dominated by a few handful of companies. But we're coming. We're coming. We're the next unicorns. We're building the next unicorns. We're gonna disrupt this stuff. And I think it's a monopoly only because no one has been innovating in this space yet. And so therefore you got a few leaders working on, everything in women's health. This was a very powerful talk. I'm so grateful we had it. I'm so glad it's recorded. I hope this goes viral. Really amazing. I totally forgot earlier, we actually have a free to feed package to give away. So what a great way to end it by doing that. And Dr. Trill, shake it up a little bit, put your hand in there a little bit. Yes. Who's gonna win it? And it's like a yoga mat?
Yes, we have a free to feed yoga. We have a free to feed yoga mat and a free to feed Yeti cup. And Mr. Doug. Must be present to win.
That's what he got for leaving.
Yeah. I don't know if he yogas. I'll tell him he won.
So if he really wants a yoga mat, he can find me.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Drum roll.
Next person.
Ava.
Yes! Amazing. Thank you all so much for participating in this fireside chat. We still have the space. We still have a lot of wine. We got some food left. So please, let's mingle. Let's have a good time. We'll talk about vaginas, Ellen, right? Yeah, that's right. And I do want to let you know that tomorrow we are having another kick-ass day at NC State. Same room, same time. We'll have lunch. We have Wisdom doing a financial workshop. So get your questions ready about your business plan, about your COGS, about your profit margins, about your taxes or whatever financial people do. I love to hire smart ladies like them to do that for me. And tomorrow night we will be meeting in Research Triangle Park at Launch Labs. Launch Labs is a place where startups can have lab space and desk space, and we will be at the BioMilk headquarters. They take your mammary cells, genetically modify them to produce breast milk in the laboratory setting. So one day, this is us disrupting the monopoly, right? No more formula. One day you may actually be able to go to the grocery store, buy your cow milk, your soy milk, and your breast milk, all in the same fridge. That'd be crazy. So tomorrow, please come to that. We're going to be discussing FemTech in RTP. That's where we are, RTP Research Triangle Park. We're going to have some amazing moderators. Emily's going to be moderating, and we have some other innovators that will be on the panel talking about why we think that this is a great area to innovate in women's health. So see you tomorrow, but let's hang out, let's have a good time. All right, thank you.